Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name's Maya. I'm a program assistant at the Russell Sage Foundation.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Deandra. I'm also a program assistant with the Russell Sage Foundation.
Before we jump into things, just a couple of housekeeping notes. The first is that, as you heard, this meeting's being recorded. It'll be posted to our website in the next couple of days. If you have any questions throughout the talk, please use Zoom's Q&A function, and we'll get to those at the end. For your questions, please refrain from asking specific project-related questions. Those are best directed to our email on this slide, programs@rsage.org. And if we don't get to your question, you can put your question in an email to us, and one of us will respond to you in the next couple of days. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about the Russell Sage Foundation, our funding priorities, and our core research grants, which is this webinar is for our upcoming deadline in July, and then we'll have a section for Q&A at the end. So, the Russell Sage Foundation, we're a pretty old institution founded in 1907 by Margaret Olivia Sage. And our mission is we support work on the improvement of the social and living conditions in the United States. From 1907 to 1944, we were a source of institutional support and information for private social agencies on topics like poverty reduction and social work. Since 1945, we transitioned to funding basic social science research. We're focused on strengthening the methods, data, and theoretical core of the social sciences in order to better document and understand some of the pressing social, political, and economic problems in the United States. And the main disciplines that we fund are sociology, economics, political science, and psychology.
RSF supports the social science research through our four long-standing core program areas. Starting with behavioral science and decision making in context, or BSEMC, this program encourages economists and non-economists to study economic, social, political, and psychological decision-making processes, attitudes, behaviors, and institutional practices. For the Future of Work program, or FOW, we are interested in anything that impacts the labor market, including but not limited to AI, the effects of minimum rate raise, unionization, and worker power. Next, the Social, Political, and Economic Inequality program, or SPEI, examines factors that contribute to social, political, and economic inequalities in the United States, and the extent to which those inequalities affect social, political, psychological, and economic outcomes, such as educational and labor market access and opportunities, social economic mobility within and across generations, and civic participation and representation. Lastly, the Race, Ethnicity, and Immigration Program, or REI, examines the roles of race, ethnicity, nativity, legal status, and their interactions with each other and other social categories in the social, economic, and political outcomes for immigrants, U.S.-born, racial and ethnic minorities, and native-born whites. Please note that we recognize that these program areas tend to overlap. If a PI is confused about which program area their project may fall under, just send us a quick email to programs@rsage.org at the end of this webinar.
There are also a couple of things that we don't fund specifically. We don't fund work that's focused on health outcomes. We typically don't fund work focused on educational processes, teacher outcomes, or curricular development. We do fund work on some educational studies on student outcomes, especially as students are approaching the labor force. So that's high school and college. We don't fund work on subjects outside of the US. And we don't fund operational support, program evals, animal studies, um, planning grants, infrastructure grants, etc.
In addition to our core research areas, RSF supports projects under these two special initiatives. First, the Immigration and Immigrant Integration, or III, co-funded with the Carnegie Corporation, Supports innovative research on the effects of race, citizenship, legal status, and politics, political culture and political policy on outcomes for immigrants and the native born of different racial and ethnic groups and generations. The second initiative, co-funded with the Hewlett Foundation, the Spencer Foundation, and the William T. Grant Foundation, centers on the repercussions of the 2023 Supreme Court decision to end affirmative action. The initiative seeks to fully understand the downstream effects of the decisions relating to labor outcomes of graduates and reactions from organizations and the people on hiring practices relating to the Supreme Court decision of to end affirmative action.
We have a bunch of different funding mechanisms through which we support work on these funding priorities. This webinar is going to focus on our core research grants, but I'll also walk you through briefly our early career grants, and then on the next slide, some about our fellowships and our journal. So our core research grants are 1 or 2 year grants of up to $200,000, open to all applicants with a PhD or terminal degree, regardless of citizenship or institution. It's a two-stage application process. You first submit a short 4-page letter of inquiry, and then, pending positive reviews of that LOI, you will be invited to submit a full proposal. Grants over $75,000 are approved by RSF's Board of Trustees, while grants under $75,000 are approved by RSF's president. That's pretty much the only difference between our trustee grants and our presidential grants. You don't have to do anything about at the time of application other than tell us the budget amount that you're requesting, and the process of the application and the review process is pretty much the same. The funding categories that you can request support for are pretty the typical things that you'd request in a research grant. So we often fund summer salary, research assistant, data access, or collection costs, survey fees, things like that. We also have 3 early career grant mechanisms. These are the Sheldon Danziger Pipeline Grants Competition, the Causal Research on the Criminal Justice System Program, and our dissertation research grants. These are smaller 1-year grants with 1-stage applications where you submit everything that we need to evaluate the application at the time of application, at the deadline. And for these, we have various restrictions on eligibility. The Pipeline Grants Competition, which we have a deadline for this fall, is open to all non-tenured professors, including assistant professors, adjuncts, lecturers, etc. While the Causal Research on the Criminal Justice System program is open only to tenure-track assistant professors at U.S. institutions. Lastly, our dissertation research grants are up to $15,000 for ABD PhD students at U.S. institutions. So if you have any students, you can direct them our way. The next deadline for the CRCJ program and the DRG programs will be this coming winter for the DRG program and next spring for the CRCJ program. In addition to our research grants, we also offer 2 prestigious fellowships, and we have a publishing journal. So the Visiting Scholars Program is a funded residential fellowship in New York City for applicants that are 3+ years past their PhD during a sabbatical or leave time from their institution. It's an interdisciplinary cohort of about 17 scholars to strengthen your work before publication. So this is write-up time. This is not meant to be data collection time. We don't fund, that's funded through our research grants. And there's a deadline in June for residents the academic year that starts 15 months later. So the upcoming deadline for our Visiting Scholars program is this June 25th. And it's for the 2027-2028 academic year. Our Visiting Researchers program is a shorter term unfunded fellowship, so it stays for a couple months up to 1 semester. And while it's unfunded, you would receive office space, staff support, lunch at the foundation during your time in residence, and the deadline for that is in May for residents in the following academic year. So we're currently reviewing visiting researcher applications for this coming academic year. For the 2027-2028 academic year, the deadline will be in May of 2027. Lastly, Just to highlight the Russell Sage Foundation Journal of the Social Sciences, rsfjournal.org. It's our open access, peer-reviewed, and interdisciplinary journal with topic-based issues such as the socioeconomic impacts of COVID-19, growing up in rural America, etc.
Okay, so our next deadline for the core research grants will be July 15th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. For our core programs, we provide 1 to 2 year grants of up to $200,000 that relate to RSF's core program areas and special initiatives. We should note that each of our deadlines, and we have 3 deadlines a year, each deadlines have rotational basis. So for our next deadline, which again is July 15th, we are going to be accepting LOIs under the following program areas: behavioral science and decision making in context, ethnicity, and immigration and immigrant integration, and the 2023 Supreme Court decision to ban race-conscious admissions. So, something to note about our LOI deadlines is that, or for our core research grant areas, is that for the core research areas, we have a 2-stage application process. So the first step is to submit your LOI along with a 5-page CV. And all application materials are submitted through Flux. If you email us an LOI and your CV, we cannot accept that. Um, all the materials must be added onto Flux because we have an application and there are questions that we need responded to. And I would highly suggest that you register if you do not have an active account as of right now. I would suggest that you register for Flux sooner rather than later. Our registration portal is manual, so we would need to approve each one individually. And as we get closer to deadline dates, the queue could be quite long and it could hinder your ability to submit at the deadline time. So submit your registration sooner rather than later. For the LOIs, which are again 4 pages single space, the LOI should outline your research motivation, theory, and contribution. A majority of the space should be dedicated to the research design. References do not count towards the page limit, nor do survey guides or interview guides or survey instruments. A 1-page appendix for charts and tables is allowed. However, if you have charts and tables within the body of your LOI, that does count towards the page limit. So please add your charts and tables as an appendix. Formal budgets are not needed at the time of the application. A simple 1 to 2 page sentences with a brief description about your budget is acceptable for the purpose of the LOI. If you are asked to submit a full proposal, we will ask for further details. And just some tips regarding the LOI process. First, confirm the fit with RSF's priorities. I would suggest looking at our recent grants, CV of people that you have cited. Next, assess the timing of your project. Do you have preliminary work or pilot data? Is the design sufficiently detailed? Review your application materials. Um, the research questions should drive the proposal. So a balanced narrative with the research design being about 50% of the page limit. Preemptively acknowledge your limitations. This kind of shows more strength in your proposal, since these are going to go out for review, which we will discuss in just a second. Um, And if asked to respond to reviewers, um, remember to respond thoroughly and graciously as possible. Also, your review or your response memos uh are not limited to page limits. Not saying that you should submit a 20-page response memo, but you shouldn't be afraid to have thorough responses that may go quite long. Um, and please don't forget that Russell Sage is an interdisciplinary funder. Um, Read and cite outside of your discipline. This will make your LOI much stronger and more competitive. Now, here we have a kind of a flow chart regarding our two-step process. So, first, we have the submission of the LOI and subsequent materials, which are again due July 15th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Um, if you guys have any technical issues with Flux, which does happen especially on deadline dates, please send an email to programs@rsage.org and we will assist. After the submission, all LOIs will be internally reviewed by staff, where we will screen for desk rejections. And sometimes these motivations could be lack of detail in the design, perhaps a design flaw. Maybe it was a little too preliminary and we needed more information before moving forward. Or it was not a fit for our foundation, meaning that it was a non-US focused project. It was focused on health or education, etc. If you are desk rejected, you may reach out to us for feedback, and we will respond to you at our as soon as possible. Um, if you make it past the desk rejection stage, we send your LOIs to external reviews. External reviewers provide recommendation and feedback for the project and are recruited across multiple disciplines based on topical or methodological fit. Reviewers are asked to comment on importance of the research questions and whether they are grounded in prior theory, appropriateness of the research design to address those questions, likely contributions of the project, and the qualifications of the investigator. Reviewers are asked for funding recommendations, either strongly funded, strongly funded, recommended, recommend funding, conditional, recommend, or do not fund. Um, so yes, we move on to our next section.
So, if you receive positive reviews at the external LOI review stage, we'll invite you to submit a full proposal. About half of the LOIs that go out for external review are invited to submit full proposals. Uh, at this proposal submission, this is your time to give us everything that you have about your project. So we give you up to 10 pages for the full proposal. You'll have a chance to respond to the reviewers on your LOI. So you'll get a review response memo. There's no page limit on that. And you'll submit a budget and a budget narrative. In addition, we ask for the CVs of your co-PIs. If you're doing survey research or contracting with a survey firm, we ask for 2 quotes and a discussion of your choice. And if you have supplemental materials, such as your IRB approval, your confirmation of data access, it's great to submit those, especially because sometimes reviewers comment on those in their response to our requests. Once you submit your proposal, so the invitations for this cycle, the invitations for proposal submission will go out at the end of September, and you'll have about a month to turn it around and submit a full proposal by October 26th. It'll go back out for external peer review. We try to recruit the same reviewers as on the LOI, +1 or +2, depending on the level of the on the budget amount requested for the project. Um, Those reviewers will return comments to RSF, will mask them and anonymize them if they're positive, and ask you for another response to reviewer comments. Um, at this stage, we're asking reviewers a lot of the same things that we ask them at the LOI stage, but they have a little bit more to comment on because you've given us a 10-page proposal. So it's the same things that Deandra mentioned, importance of the research questions, comments on the research design, contribution of the project, and a funding recommendation. Once you submit a response to those comments, it'll be your application is reviewed by an RSF advisory committee if it's a trustee level grant, or it's reviewed by RSF staff and the president's team for a presidential level grant. And then it goes to the board or to the president for approval. So the funding decisions for these LOIs at this July deadline will be timed to the March 2027 Board of Trustees meeting with an earliest start date of May 1st, 2027. Before we jump into our Q&A section, just to reiterate some of our tips and suggestions that I think Deandra mentioned earlier, the big thing that our big goal in this webinar is to get you past the desk reject stage. So the first thing that you need to do is confirm your fit with RSF priorities. Uh, we we desk reject somewhere between half and two-thirds of the LOIs we receive just because of limitations on our funding capacity. And the biggest reason is that they're not a close fit with our funding priorities. Um, and then the other reason why applications don't move forward at the desk reject stage is because we don't have enough detail on the research design. I can't emphasize enough. Half of the LOI should be details on your research design. If you don't know enough about your research design to fill up 2+ pages, the project's probably not at the right stage for application to RSF. Um, and one way to get yourself to be able to fill up that space is to cut other sections. We don't need a ton of detail on your qualifications. We have your CV. We don't need a ton of detail on your budget. Although this 2 or 3 sentences that you give us about your budget request should be in line with our budget requirements, which are available on our website. And we don't need something like a broader impact section like is requested by federal funding agencies or things like that. And we don't need a whole lot on theory or literature. We see this especially from early career scholars who are applying to us. They really want to prove that they've done their homework. And that's great, but it can take away from the space that you have to talk about your project itself. And you'll have plenty of space to do that if you're invited to submit a full proposal. Um, and lastly, here are some valuable links, our website, a QR code to create an account in Flux, our newsletter, and our email, which is programs@rsage.org. And I'll open up the floor for Q&A.
So we have a few questions in the Q&A right now. There's two that are kind of related. So I'll just read them off starting right now. So if invited to a full proposal, how much can the budget change from what is presented in the LOI? And the next question, can you please elaborate on what fits in the 50 to 75K budget window? Related to my other question, could an LOI submitted at 50K adjust the full proposal budget to be over 50K if costs for data collection, for example, increase by the time of the full proposal? Okay. So, um, basically when you submit your LOI, you're going to be asked how much you're requesting. Based on how much you're requesting, that's going to put you into one or two buckets. You're either going into the presidential or trustee bucket. Maya, could you go to that one slide that shows all of the categories?
Our
Thank you.
funding mechanism here?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So if we go under core research grants, we see that there are two buckets, trustee and presidential. That basically determines where your limitations. Um, so if you submit under presidential, generally speaking, you have to stay within your budget needs to stay within the presidential limits. You can't exceed and go into becoming a trustee all of a sudden. Um, and for the 50 to 75K, what differentiates that or what would allow you to get to that 75K mark would be if there are multiple junior PIs on the project, if there is data collection, so maybe you're doing interviews or surveys, or if you need access to restricted data. So that is what would get you into that 50 to 75K mark. Um, and so let's say that also if you submit a budget for 50 and you have data collection, you can it could go up to 75. That shouldn't be an issue. But it still needs to be within that 75K limit. Um, but also further budget questions. If you get past the proposal stages and all that, we do have a process later on where we do budget reviews and we will come back with questions and just to verify things. Um, but yes, so that should answer that.
Happy to try to answer this question about preliminary work. This is a great opportunity for maybe you to send us an email with a little bit more detail about the project. For pipeline grants specifically, this grant program is targeted at people who maybe have never received significant external funding. So we realize that there's going to be a lot less preliminary work, pilot data, etc. Um, so I would say that that's probably sufficient, but I would encourage you to send us an email with an abstract or a one pager or something like that, and we can talk specifically, or we can set up some kind of one-on-one meeting if that's helpful. Um, for reviewers evaluating qualitative data proposals, we'll recruit experts using qualitative data in your methodology. So they'll evaluate your application against their expertise, which it will ideally be a close match between the methodology that you're proposing and their own, and they're hopefully a close match in the subject matter as well. So we try really hard to match external reviewers with the project, so that they can give you good feedback, and that you're getting a fair evaluation of your application. Um, Now I'm seeing a question about the key differences between the race, ethnicity, and immigration funding priority and the immigration and immigrant integration priority. There's a ton of overlap here. We bundle in our review process for our advisory committee. Our REI advisory committee also sees our III application. So there's a lot of overlap here. The key difference, I would say, is that the immigration and immigrant integration is focused specifically on immigrant experiences in the United States, whereas our race, ethnicity, and immigration program is a little bit of a larger umbrella that can look at native-born um, uh, racial disparities or things like that. This special initiative is just a way to really key in on immigration and the immigrant experience. But there's a ton of overlap. You can send us an abstract or a one pager, and we can try to give you a better a recommendation of which program to apply under. But between these two, it's really not significant which one you choose. And sometimes in the application, in our review process of applications, we move applications from one program into another, and that doesn't change anything about your experience as the applicant.
The next question I see says, earlier you mentioned about 2 pages should be dedicated towards research design. Can you talk more about some common pitfalls you see in this part of the LOI? Yeah, so just going back to our tips and suggestions, typically what we notice first is that sometimes we could clock pretty accurately which prod LOIs that were meant for NSF funding, for example. Um, and there are things that would make it a great NSF proposal, such as having project timeline and all that stuff. But those are things that we don't really care for at the LOI stage. At the LOI stage, we just want to see very thorough details about your research design. So the common pitfalls that we notice is that people have very long, lengthy sections on uh, their qualifications. They go into a lot of detail into budgets, um, which again we don't need until the proposal stage. Um, so it's just giving as much detail as possible regarding your proposal, but also mention limitations to your research design and how you plan to overcome those limitations, because that just shows your reviewers that yes, you have a strong project, but hey, it's not perfect and there's always going to be some holes here and there. But this is how I hope to circumvent those type of issues. Um, that's another thing that sets apart a good prod LOI to a really great LOI. Um, and another pitfall that I see sometimes is people not providing details on their own pilot studies relating to that project. Um, if you have pilot data for a project you're submitting to us, it's important that you incorporate some of those findings because it shows to us that you've already done the work, you're familiar with it, and this is how you hope that RSF funding will further this project to reach further potential. So it's important that you keep those details there as well. Uh, so yes, I hope you find that helpful.
Our funding priorities for our pipeline grants are exactly the same as our funding priorities for the foundation. So it's our four core program areas, behavioral science, social, political, economic inequality, race, ethnicity, immigration, future of work, as well as our special initiatives. That's sort of, we're just trying to target in on supporting early career scholars through our regular funding priorities. This next question. We do award grants to institutions outside of the US. That's not a problem. But we are not able typically to support independent scholars not affiliated with an institution. That's a result of our IRS designation. We can only make grants to nonprofits or government institutions like public universities. So we are not able to make grants directly to individuals. This
Next
next question,
question. Oh,
yeah, you
sorry.
got it. Go ahead, Deandra.
If I applied to a 2-year grant, could the second year focus on writing and the first year on active research, or do you only fund active research? Um, for our core research grants, so any of our grant programs, this is about research. So if you're planning to do writing in your second year, then you should really be applying for a 1-year grant. And RSF provides 1 to 2 year grants. Our writing phase would be more of our fellowships, and those are in residence fellowships. So what you could theoretically do is apply for a 1-year grant and then apply for a fellowship after that grant period or for the next cycle, right? Um, that way you would get the funding from RSF, but possibly, and then you would finish up your writing in residence with the foundation. Um, so no, we wouldn't fund you to write, if that makes sense. Our funding only goes for data collection and research.
Looks like that's, oh, one
Oh,
last
one more.
question. Um,
How much
yeah,
pilot data do you recommend for the research grants? If you are an early career scholar, do you recommend moving forward with the pipeline track versus the research grant track? Um, So I guess answering the first question, um, how much pilot data do you recommend for research grants? I mean, any. It's hard to tell because Russell Sage is very interdisciplinary, so we get tons of different types of projects from across the social sciences. Um, so really any pilot data is helpful. So if you have pilot data and you wish to apply for us, by all means, you could add that into your research or into your LOI, I'm sorry. For early career scholars, our pipeline program is meant for early career scholars at the like assistant professor or equivalent. If you are an assistant professor or equivalent, meaning like a lecturer or an adjunct, um, I would suggest applying for the pipeline. Um, well, at least for these two deadlines, since this this pipeline, this deadline, it would overlap with our next pipeline program. Our pipeline program is a little bit more has a little more favorable funding rates than our core research grants, so you would have a better chance because remember if you apply under the core research grants, you're also competing for funding from other scholars. Um, and and because of NSF, the lack of NSF funding, the amount of applicants has increased as well.
If you don't have pilot, so this last question, if you don't have pilot data, or you're still in the process of analyzing it for July 15th, that's potentially one option is that's an indication to hold your application until the next deadline. If you, for example, have funding to obtain pilot data between now and the following deadline. Um, if you similarly have ideas of how you plan to pilot your data or pilot your design or something of along those lines, that's information that you can share in the LOI. What we mean when we say to give us your pilot data preliminary results, anything like that, is we want proof that you've thought intentionally about your research design, that the research design that you are proposing has either been tested or it's well grounded in theory, the disciplinary practices of your work or things like that. So strengthening in order to strengthen your LOI, if you don't have pilot data, if you don't have preliminary results, tell us why you're doing what the research design that you're doing. So give us some citations. For example, this is why I plan to do these interviews this way. If you have an interview guide, you can attach that as an appendix. Um, do your homework on constructing a research design and why you think that this research design is the best way to answer the questions that you're trying to answer. Um, yeah, we don't have restrictions about over 50% of the award going to a subcontractor or something like that. Um,
And for
we
our last question, can you apply for the pipeline grant and core grant at the same time? So remember, one of the eligibility for the pipeline grant is that you cannot have received funding from Russell Sage prior to being funded the pipeline grant. So if you apply for the core grants for the July deadline, that would mean that you would get the funding by next March. Am I correct with that, Maya?
Yeah, I should jump in and say that you can apply for both. For example, you can apply for a core grant at the July deadline, and a pipeline grant at um the October deadline. You cannot apply for both a pipeline grant and a core grant at the October deadline. So we have an LOI deadline at in October and a pipeline grant deadline in October, and they're about a week apart. The reason for that is because we occasionally move applications between. I will say that if you apply for a core research grant and you'll receive a decision by the end of September, early October, if you're applying at this July deadline, and if you're invited to submit a full proposal, you're probably not a great fit for the pipeline grant program. But you'll have a decision on your July application before the pipeline grant deadline, so you'll have time to make a decision, if that makes sense. Great. Okay, I think we can wrap up. I'm gonna bring us back to our QR codes and our email. If you have any questions that come up after this, please email us programs@rsh.org. If you have project-specific questions, that's a great opportunity for you to email us as well.
You may also submit a one-page abstract as well to our email at programs@rsh.org. That will help us to give you better feedback about potential fit for the program. Um, and also just register for Flux well in advance so that way you avoid any of the technical issues that seem to arise with the Flux system.
Awesome. And this recording of this webinar will be posted on our website, hopefully by the end of the week, if not by early next week, so you can go back and watch it as needed. Thanks so much for being here, everyone.